welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name is Kyla, and somehow the end of 2022 has arrived. I do not know how we got here, but it's here, which means it's time to talk about all of the books that I read this year. This is the first in my end of the year series, in which I will have 3 videos to share with you. Today is going to be the books that surprised me the most, and then I also will have a video for the worst books that I read / the most disappointing, and of course round it out with my favorites of the year. So if you are not already, be sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you know when these videos are posted. And let's just go ahead and dive in to the most surprising books that I read this year. Now, surprising could mean a couple of different things. It doesn't mean that it was necessarily the most surprising plot twist, although that could be it. It could just mean that I wasn't expecting to like it and loved it, or there was a part of the book that really surprised me, or a part of the plot that really surprised me. We're gonna cover it all. I have 10 books to share with you, so let's just get started. The first one that I'm going to talk about is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. This one took me by surprise for sure. I have never really gotten into a fantasy series quite like this before. You know, I've read Harry Potter, I've read a couple of other fantasy things, but nothing quite like this. So I was surprised by, one, how fast it caught my attention, how fast I was able to read a book like this. Like, it is extremely fast-paced. This book just takes off and does not stop until the very end. And I can say that about the rest of the series as well. I still have the last one to read, but I just was not going into this thinking this was going to be a new all-time favorite. I wasn't even sure if I was going to want to continue with the series itself, and yet here we are. Like I said, only have the last book to read. I love it. However, I also will say that I was very surprised about how exotic these books are. I was not anticipating them to be as romance and sex heavy as they are, but it doesn't mean that I'm against it. It just means that I was extremely caught off guard. And I'm not going to go over the plot of every single one of these, or else we will be here forever. But I really just was not expecting to love this and to love this series as much as I do. And I am excited to explore more of Sarah J. Maas's and just more fantasy series like this in general. If you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments. I do enjoy when they're not as romance heavy. That's just not really my jam. I'm here for it if it's like woven into the story, but I would love it to not be like the main focus. So if you have any suggestions, leave it as a comment. But yeah, completely surprised by A Court of Thorns and Roses. The next book I actually read, I think way back in like February or March, but it's one that has stuck with me. Like, I just think about it all the time, and that's These Silent Woods. I don't have a copy of it because I had gotten it from the library. This was part of the Book Troop book club. Like I said, I can't remember if it was February or March. I was going into this expecting it to be a thriller, and was very surprised to find out this is more of a survival story, but one that like packs such a heavy punch. It does have a little air of mystery going on throughout it. It's not necessarily, I wouldn't consider this a thriller by any means. I would consider this a survival story with a mystery. But oh my goodness, I was not expecting to fall in love with this book, with the plot, with the characters, and just get so invested in the story itself. It completely caught me off guard. I cried at the end of this book, which also is extremely surprising because that doesn't happen to me very often. But oh my god, like completely gut-wrenching, heartbreaking, and inspiring at the same time. And you just you cannot help but like open your heart to these characters, but also want to know like more of the backstory and more of the mystery that's happening. And then the ending, oh my goodness. Like, I really do highly suggest reading this. Just know going into it, it is not a thriller. It is a, like I said, survival story. If you go into that with that expectations, with knowing it's going to be a bit of a slow burn as things unravel and as you're learning more about the character's past, but oh my goodness, I love it. And I still, like, it sits on my mind constantly, and I cannot recommend this book enough. And the writing was really good. I really enjoyed everything about it, and it was just so surprising, and also just so surprising that I cried. Moving on, let's talk about a book that contains my least favorite plot twist, but that I actually enjoyed. Surprising in itself, and that is Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney. This I went into very hesitantly because I didn't really enjoy Rock, Paper, Scissors. I know a lot of people did, but I didn't. I read that last year and I really did not enjoy it that much. I thought it was just okay. It was a middle of the road thriller. I really don't enjoy domestic thrillers, so that was also that was more on me than like the story. But this one, I went in hesitantly, but also very hopeful, knowing that it was very much told in like an Agatha Christie kind of way. We're counting down hours. You have this mystery unraveling and this thriller aspect happening with this family. And I was surprised how much I really liked the characters in this. I really enjoyed having the perspective of each family member. I just found it so relatable that this family dynamic was so fractured and broken, but they all still kind of like obviously was rooted in love, but also was rooting for each other to fail. It was just so interesting to read from. And then also you have this mystery of everyone dying and who done it. But the most surprising thing was this has my least favorite plot twist at the end of it, and I'm not going to say what it is because I feel like that will just ruin the expectations going into this, and I would love you to be caught off guard as well. But because it's my least favorite plot twist, I was like, oh no, here we go. Like, as it started to unfold, I was like, are we serious? But surprisingly, I actually thought it was so well done, and I really enjoyed the angle that it took, which just like was like, is this my least favorite plot twist? It had me questioning myself for a second, but then I was reflecting on other books and was like, yeah, no, I really don't enjoy it. But this book was done so well. The ending unravels perfectly, and the twist that comes along, I'm here for it. I just think it's so cool. And now, and knowing you can definitely pick up on other things throughout the book that was kind of hinting and leading up to it. So it wasn't completely out of left field, even though it felt like that a little bit. And I just really loved it, which totally surprised me. Next, we have a book that I truly wasn't sure if I was going to like it, and that is Good Rich People. This, I knew going into it, was not necessarily going to be a dramatic thriller. It was going to be more of like a pop thriller, a more just go into it for a fun time, knowing it's going to be over the top and kind of ridiculous. So I had those expectations going into it. And I think because of that, I really was just surprised how fun this was. These kinds of thrillers are really like hit or miss. I feel like that, you know, being over the top, it can either go really right or really wrong. And also you have so many factors going into it, whether like the characters are likable, unlikable, how the book is written. And overall, I just had a really fun time with this, and I was pleasantly surprised at how dramatic this book was, and how over the top and how ridiculous, and how like I didn't really enjoy any of the characters, but I still loved the book. And I thought that the mystery thriller aspect that was unwinding throughout it was very interesting and kind of, I don't want to say hilarious because it's sad what's happening, but it just takes a tone that's a little bit more funny and like you can just have a good time with it, as opposed to being like this dramatic, horrible, graphic kind of book. And I just like, you know, like I said, these books are hit or miss, and I just had a great time. And I think that's why it was surprising to me, because like it's just, you never know. You never know the hand you're gonna be dealt with books like this, but this one, surprisingly, a really good time. On the flip side of that, next is a book that I thought was going to be a good, fun time and ended up being way darker than I was expecting, and that is A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee. I read this recently, and like I said, I went into it thinking this was going to be a dark academia, of course, but also just kind of like a fun young adult thriller that's going to have all these twists and turns. It's going to be a good time. It has witchy vibes to it, so I just thought, you know what, I'm going to get a dark academia witch story, and this caught me off guard. I was not expecting it to be as deep and as dark as it was. I felt for this main character so much. I just felt like this poor thing was being taken advantage of, exploited, and yes, she's unreliable, but just, I felt like this poor girl like just needs someone in her corner, and she doesn't have anyone, and I was not expecting to feel the way that I did while reading this. That caught me off guard. Also, her just being completely unreliable caught me off guard, and then also the twist at the end, even though I had a hint of what was going on, I mean, the way this book unfolds is completely surprising in my opinion, and that's one thing that I love about young adult. They do twists and turns so well, sometimes better than adult thrillers and mysteries, which I just like, that's surprising in itself. But the direction this book takes, it's equally as dark, and the things that are happening, you know, you expect like a fun witch story, but no, it's like deep, dark witch shit going on, and just like, I was completely off guard this whole book. So this whole thing was just surprisingly dark in my opinion. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great time. I really loved the writing, but just surprising. Keeping on the theme of dark academia, the next one is also considered a dark academia thriller, and that is The It Girl by Ruth Ware. I was surprised by this book in a few different ways. One, of course, the twists and turns at the end. I thought it was someone else, and like, I peg myself as someone who does read a lot of mysteries, thrillers, and now just getting into horror, like being able to be really good about detecting the twists and the whodunits of it all. But this one, I feel like Ruth Ware did a really good job of casting doubt on so many different characters that I thought I had it figured out, and I was wrong. So that was surprising in itself, and I love being proven wrong. I love when that happens, so I'm here for it. But also just the whole tone of this book was also a little bit surprising. Because this character is pregnant, I wasn't expecting this like darker tone and this like a dangerous tone around her as a character being pregnant, and how much that would come into play. So that was also very surprising. Also, on a not so great note, surprising how freaking long this book is, okay? This book is about 150 to 200 pages too long in my opinion. I still really enjoyed it. I gave this a high rating, and I still really enjoyed the story. Like I said, I was caught off guard, so that I really enjoyed, and I really liked the writing. Ruth Ware's writing is always really good, but I shouldn't say always really good. Her writing's good, her plot sometimes, not so much, but being a Ruth Ware, also surprised at how much I liked it. But this book is way too long, so that was also surprising itself. I did find myself in the middle there going, okay, we didn't need all of this. We could have just gotten here with, you know, a lot less pages, and it still would have been as enjoyable. But here nor there, I really enjoyed it. The most surprising thing was that I was wrong, and I loved that. And then we we have all of those other things that I mentioned. So I would highly recommend this one, especially if you've read other Ruth Wares and not really enjoyed them. I feel like this is something that is really enjoyable. I know this has a lot of mixed reviews, which is not so surprising, but I was surprised about how much I loved it. The next book on this list is Come Closer by Sarah Gran. This is a little horror novella, I believe it's considered. It's a very short horror book. And also this one, very surprising that I enjoyed it because it does take on a little bit more of a paranormal plot line, and sometimes I feel like that's hit or miss for me. Sometimes I enjoy it, sometimes I don't. When it's very apparent that that's what's happening, I enjoy it. And it was very obvious in this book that that is what's happening. We have a possession, paranormal kind of story going on. But the most surprising thing was the ending of this book. Not so much like what happens, but the amount of like gruesome detail that this goes into. My jaw was on the floor. I listened to the audiobook of this and I literally had to like stop what I was doing and just sit there and like absorb what was happening, and just I literally was just sitting there like it just kept going and going and going, and I wasn't really expecting it. Now, being a horror, I should have expected everything to not necessarily wrap up in a pretty bow, because that's not what horror is about. But this, because I'm very new to horror, just had me shocked. And again, my jaw just on the floor. I wasn't expecting it, and I was really caught off guard about how much I enjoyed it, even though it was kind of gruesome and not what I was expecting. Still really enjoyable, so super surprising to me. And then the next book is kind of in the same realm of taking a turn that I wasn't really expecting, and that is Sawkill Girls. This is a young adult horror thriller that I was not expecting. I thought this was just going to be a classic thriller of a friend group, kind of like A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, and I was very wrong. Very wrong. And I listened to this on audio as well, and as I was listening, I was like, wait, what? And I kept having to rewind it because I just could not grasp what was going on. This book takes a very Stranger Things type turn, and I just was completely caught off guard by that. And that's probably bad on me because I didn't really read about the synopsis too much going into it. But even after reading the book and reading the synopsis, I feel like it does not give you that sort of direction. Like, it doesn't make you think that it's going that way. It just makes it seem like a thriller that a murder has happened and you're trying to figure out who done it, and you have this girl who's kind of playing detective and that kind of thing. And then it takes like a Stranger Things type turn, and I just was completely caught off guard. And I feel like I'm still very confused about what happened in this book. So my plan is actually to do a reread of this with the physical copy, because I feel like I did not give this book justice. I gave it a 3.5 stars, but I just feel like it probably could be a higher rating had I been reading along with the physical book as well and really been like super absorbed in the story. And now that I know that it takes that turn, I feel like I'll enjoy it that much more. So I do plan on doing a reread of this in 2023, and I hope I'm just as surprised or even just get more surprised by what's happening on the reread. And I would highly recommend the book. It was actually written really well. Just know going into it that it does take a bit of a turn, and now you know that it's coming. And the last two on this list are some fun ones that just blew my socks off. The first one is Sourdough by Robin Sloan. This cover always gets washed out. But I mean, this book sounds like something that shouldn't be as enjoyable as it was, because literally this book is about a woman and a sourdough starter. I don't even know what to say. That should not be like an interesting thing for a plot line, but this has sort of a fantasy element to it, which is why I really enjoyed it. Also, I'm just like a fiend for bread, specifically sourdough. It's my favorite. So I just feel like I was biased going into this book already. Like, you just had to say sourdough and fantasy, and like, I'm here for it. But I was pleasantly surprised about how much depth this book had, and the lessons, and how well written this book is, and the metaphor behind everything. Like, it's a lot deeper than what it sounds, and I really enjoyed that, especially because it touches on, you know, kind of like work-life balance and this like hustle culture and things like that, which I can really relate to, being someone who used to work 40 to 50 hours in an office and then went to work for herself, and now like changing careers and doing all that. Like, I truly understand where this main character was coming from. And I think maybe that's also was a surprising element, was I wasn't expecting to connect with her so much, but I just felt for her, and I felt so much of what she was going through and what she was feeling. So that was very surprising, but also just overall where this book goes. And the audiobook is really good and actually has like little sound effects, which was also pretty surprising. But overall, I just had such a good time, and I was not expecting to love this as much as I did. And the last one on this list is one that's been hyped up, at least for me, for a long time. So I was a little bit weary going into it, thinking, am I going to love this as much as everyone says I'm going to? But I did, and that was A Curious Beginning by Deanna Raybourn. I wouldn't say recently, but I got more into like cozy mysteries this year than any other year. Previously, I've been known to just read a lot of like heavy thrillers and dabble in some horror, but this year I really embraced the whole cozy mystery vibe, and turns out it's a genre that I am completely here for. I love it. I think it's so fun, and it just is comforting. You know, sometimes you don't want something that's as dark and as twisted and as dramatic. You just want to curl up with something fun and like unpack a mystery and see if you can figure it out and just have a good time. And that's what this was. Also, being a period piece, something that takes place in the 1800s, I was a little bit hesitant because sometimes the writing can be a little bit hard to decipher when you're using certain language and just the way they put sentences together back then. But this was done so well, and I was surprised about how fast of a read this was, and also how much, okay, I know I'm not a romance gal, but like, I'm rooting for what's happening in this book and in this series, and I do not know where it's going to go because this is the only one in the series that I've read so far, but I was just so surprised about how much I loved this. This was, like I said, kind of the first cozy mystery that I got into, so I was surprised and caught off guard about how much I enjoyed it, but then I just wanted more, and I'm so happy that I got into this genre, and also just so pleasantly surprised about how much I loved it, and also the mystery that takes place throughout this, like the whodunit of it all, very surprising because you really do have so many twists and turns and characters going on throughout this that you're not really sure where it's going, because I feel like a book like this really could go anywhere. It's not necessarily one of the main characters that could be one of the heavy hitters, you know? You have so many other little facets happening that I was really caught off guard by the ending, and I loved that. So surprised by the genre, surprised by this series, or the start of the series, and surprised by the ending. And that is it. Those are the 10 books that surprised me this year. I am going to try and not overlap these lists as I go on, but it might happen. Some of these might end up on the end of the year favorites list, maybe not, maybe trilogy, but I did try to keep it as separate as possible so I'm not talking about the same books over and over and over again. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and again, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so you do not miss a single video in this series. I'm so excited to share the worst books of the year with you and also my absolute top faves. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!
With you and I, the future is bright.